Sweet. Well, hey, everybody. Patrick Kirby here from Do Good Better Consulting. Welcome to our first guest expert training here for, all things nonprofit. It's going to be a recurring series with leaders throughout really the Midwest at this point. And I think we're going to kind of go national with a couple of folks that I've got lined up really quickly. But I thought I would start this whole process with a good buddy of mine, Scott Burlingame, who is the executive director of Independence Inc. up in Minot. He's also the founder and runs a website called nonprofitthoughts.com. You should check that out. You should follow them on Facebook. And really talking about the philosophy of nonprofit leadership, nonprofit fundraising, all the things that we don't like talking about, he's blogging about, so you should go and pay attention to him. And we wanted to bring up a topic today that was really interesting to me personally, and it caught my attention right away, which is the idea of competition between nonprofits. And so I wanted to give the floor to Scott. Everybody who is muted, just kind of raise your hand if you have a question. We'll kind of wrap up at the end, too, to kind of get some thoughts from the group. But Scott, you got the floor. Why don't you introduce yourself to everybody and start there.
All right. Thanks a lot, Patrick, and welcome. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see people up and going and drinking coffee on a Tuesday morning that I don't know where you're at, but here it's kind of gloomy out. So I appreciate everybody doing this effort. And I wanted to give you all just a little bit about me. As Patrick said, I am the executive director of Independence Incorporated. And when we talk about the nonprofit community, I've worked in the nonprofit community for, I think, 24 years now in a variety of different settings. Most of my paid employment have been serving people with disabilities in various roles. My last 18 years, I've worked in the disability rights movement, so working, kind of making the world a better place to live and be in for people with disabilities. My 8 years ago last week, I became the executive director of Independence Incorporated up here in Minot, and we serve an 11-county service area, kind of in the west corner of the state. But also, I've served on, I don't know, dozens of boards throughout the time as a board member. I ran another nonprofit with a budget of about $30,000 a year, and I've been on a board of directors of a nonprofit with a budget of over $20 million. So I like to think I've been on a kind of a variety of things. I've been on boards on a local, state, and national level. And so what I wanted to do when I began this adventure of what is now nonprofitthoughts.com and this opportunity to collaborate with Patrick through Do Good Better Consulting is to provide just a slightly different outlook or presentation on what nonprofits are. And a lot of it was the conversations that those of us who have been in the nonprofit world have when we're sitting around having a cup of coffee or an ice cold adult beverage at the end of a day. And those conversations that just aren't happening enough out there. And I think that there's a few things that we can say to each other that aren't necessarily said, when you're not in the battlefield or whatever, the way that some of us are. So one of them is this ideal of collaboration versus competition. And it's amazing to me because I wrote a blog about this like last Sunday. And then on Wednesday, I was at a meeting here in town, and this very topic came up. And what came up at this topic was this idea that, and it was funders in the room talking about it. And funders quickly almost have just this natural Pavlovian negative response when you talk about competition in the nonprofit community. And they say things like, we just need to make sure you guys all got to get together. Like we're going to all get together at some social event and just make sure none of us are competing with each other. And to me, I think that does some harm. And I think what we need to do is focus more on collaboration and just be very aware of competition. And so first off, I want to talk a little bit about collaboration. And I am a huge fan of collaboration. I don't know any nonprofit that exists in the world that has enough money to serve everybody that they want to serve or to completely meet their mission. And so collaboration can be an extraordinarily important key. And we have collaboration all the time. We work with different organizations where we come in and we're like, what do you do well? So what does each of the organizations that are represented here today do well? I think that's usually a relatively quick answer that you can respond to pretty quick, just like that. And that's awesome. That's exactly what we want to do, is be able to have that conversation and say, this is what we do well. So what we do well and what Kristen does well and Irina does well and what Andrea does well, it's going to be all a little bit different. However, sometimes we can come together and find things that we can do together. And An example that we do here in Minot is 4 different organizations actually get together and do a joint fundraiser together. And that fundraiser works because the 4 of us organizations aren't exactly the same. Whereas we may cross over some of the same clientele, we don't compete for the same mission. We don't compete necessarily for the same dollars. And so we can bring each other together and make the best of all of our organizations. So we all have unique staff, we all have unique boards, we all have unique donors, we all have unique volunteers, and we can bring what makes each of our organizations unique together in order to make a collaborative fundraiser that has a lot of good things happen from it. But it's also a lot of work, and I will tell you that too. One of the realities of collaboration, and I'm willing to bet everybody that's ever collaborated in this room knows, sometimes that not everybody plays by the same rules. And so how many times have you guys been in a room, and you know a better example of when going back to college and you had those opportunities to do a joint collaborative project, and then one person in the room did all the work, and then somebody showed up at the last minute and got the same grade? It's not a whole lot different when we talk about collaboration in the nonprofit world, to be honest with you. And we've all had those experiences when somebody in the room isn't necessarily doing their share of the work. And the only way to fix that is by, obviously communication, being extraordinarily clear in what your expectations of each other. The other thing is sometimes you just quite honestly don't invite people back to the collaboration party the next time if they as an organization or they as an individual aren't doing this and don't want to work. And that sounds a little harsh, but it's kind of the way it is. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities to kind of bring together best practices. And one thing I'll do here when we open it up for discussion is I want to hear from each of you and maybe hear some of your examples of best practices and collaboration that you've had. Now, the flip side of that is competition. And one of the frustrating things that I mentioned about at this meeting last week is the reality that competition actually does happen in the nonprofit world. And we're oftentimes competing. We compete for the same funders sometimes. We compete for the same donors sometimes. We compete for the same grants sometimes. We sometimes compete for the same clientele. And what I don't like when people say we shouldn't do that is I think it takes away our incentive to become innovative, to improve, to compete against ourselves. We as human beings are natural competitors. We like to be better, whether we admit it or not. We want to be better than ourselves yesterday. We want to be better than our competition and all that stuff. And that competition breeds creativity. We would never expect, if we were, say, the Chamber of Commerce in your local community, we would never say, or we shouldn't ever say, we only want one restaurant in town. And as long as we have that one restaurant in town that serves substandard food and has no competition, that's going to be good enough. Because, of course, we want a variety of restaurants, because who wants to eat at the exact same restaurant every night? And, okay, I know a few people that do, but most people don't want to eat at the same restaurant every night. And so we allow for, and we expect in the for-profit community for there to be competition, because maybe that restaurant doesn't get to stay in business anymore because it wasn't being innovative, it wasn't providing a good service to the community, and for a variety of other reasons. And maybe a new restaurant came in and kind of took over it and has been able to better serve the community. The same kind of things should and be allowed to happen in the nonprofit community. And I'll look at this a little bit from my perspective as a disability rights advocate. There was a lot of money and a lot of organizations started up historically in the disability community for what they thought was the best way to serve people with disabilities. And oftentimes those places were started with well-meaning people with good intentions, and they ended up not really being the providers of choice for people with disabilities. And so we actually ended up with lawsuits and all kinds of other cool things to actually create real choice for people with disabilities and real options. And that has made life better for people with disabilities. And I think that's true across the board, whether you be in an art field, you're in a foundation type field, or whatever you're in. I think the competition makes us stronger.
Scott, just to add to that too, a lot of people, I think, even the small and the medium-sized nonprofits, from a competition standpoint, lack the confidence that of abundance, like the abundance mindset, they completely lack, and so they don't understand that A, there's enough money to go around. B, there's enough volunteers to go around. If you just position yourself either differently than others, you're going to get a piece of this. And I think that's the hang up that I've had for a long time, and what got me going on your particular blog post was that individual groups and organizations are terrified of competition because they are so fearful of losing that donor that they're like, oh God, they're gonna take away my donor. And we've been saying this in private conversations, like you said, over beers. everyone's got the same 20 donors on the list in, either the state or the region of the richest people in the entire world. We want them on our list. And if you've got one of them, or you've got a brother-in-law of somebody who's got all that money, you just want to grab onto them, hold tightly. But they give to your organization because they believe in your cause. And so if you're chasing after additional donors, or you're believing in this abundance mindset, all you're doing is giving the donor the option to contribute more to your particular organization, not from a competitive side, but you're allowing your organization to be creative and then become that sort of competitive organization, and then you're giving the donor the option and getting them excited about donating to your specific cause or specific area of expertise because of it. But it all starts with that idea that we're not good enough as an organization to deserve this money. Or we don't believe that there's enough money for everybody. So I have to, oh gosh, I hope somebody doesn't take away our donors. Like, that's the most ridiculous thing of all time.
Absolutely. And I'm gonna steal something from Andrea here that we talked about years ago when we worked together, which was, you got to puke your nonprofit. And I know that sounds gross and everything else, but man, you got to just push out all the time the value of your nonprofit. And I'm proud of what we do here, and we do good things for the community, and we are unapologetic in how awesome we are. And when you do that, people are going to naturally want to join your cause. They're going to want to be part of what you're doing because it's pretty freaking cool. And I am so tired. I get sick and tired of seeing nonprofits that don't do that, that have this and said this, golly gee, it's sure nice if somebody can give me some money, and it's tough out there, and I don't know, if we don't have money, we're going to go under, and it's going to be the end of the world. And I'm like, how about we just flip that script a little bit and say, we're not better because, golly gee, if we go away, things are going to be bad. We're better because we are an innovative, creative. We're a value to this community. We're a value to the clientele that we serve. We're a value to our donors. We're a value to our staff. We're a value to our fundraiser, our donors, just across the board, selling that value and just pounding it and pounding it and pounding it.
I have never known a donor who got really excited about a woe is me, we're not really great as an organization bit. No donor has ever popped up on my radar going, you know what, I didn't really believe in your organization, but when you were sort of talking about how terrible life is and about how mundane the work that you do is, boy, it melted my heart. And I was really enthusiastic about getting after that organization that didn't believe in itself. Oh, here's $1 million. I've never seen that. That doesn't exist. Yet we continue to see that in the small and medium-sized nonprofits, especially. Is this, well, I can't play in the sandbox with the big brother of the of any particular organization that's around us in the area, or big sister who's getting all of the money. Like, we can't compete with that. That should be your goal, and you should build a competitive mindset that allows you to differentiate yourself from everything else. Like, there's always one thing that you do differently than everybody else. Like, Scott, what's an example? I mean, maybe this is a good time. What's an example of what Independence does that's way different than any other human service industry or organization within your area?
We do disability right. That's our motto, which means that the way we view disability creates better outcomes for our people that work through our organization, and it makes our community a better place to live, work, and play for everybody. So that's what we do. We just view things differently. Yeah,
and that alone separates you from any other organization that's in your area, and then that becomes your competitive edge against everybody else. It doesn't put anybody else down. It doesn't reduce anybody's ability to serve. It just differentiates yourself, and that becomes your competitive edge more than any other organization. And every other organization has that bit. And if you're not an organization that concentrates on what your competitive edge is, you've lost the game. That has to be the basis of your organization. If you can take something away out of this first 15 minutes, is get your difference. What's your point of difference as an organization? And then that becomes your mission to spread the good word with everybody else.
Right. And Patrick, this gives me an opportunity to quote both a book and a movie here a little bit, which is some of my favorite things to do. But Michael Lewis wrote a book a few years ago about baseball called Moneyball. However, and I've read the book, but I don't remember it as well. But I remember the movie starring Brad Pitt, and this part I'm going to talk about sounds much better if you just picture me as Brad Pitt. Maybe we can make that happen in the computer world here. But what they talk about is the Oakland A's being a small market baseball team, and then they talk about the New York Yankees and all these big teams. And what they say is those teams are out there, they're doing what they're doing. And he says they've got a pile of money. Then there's a pile of shit, and then there's us. And he says we have got to think of things differently. And that's what I think about us small and medium-sized nonprofits, is that we have got to think about things differently. And there are opportunities that we can exploit in order to be competitive. And so those things might be, we talk about in the volunteer world that, yes, there may be the same 75 people that volunteer for everything, but you know what? There are thousands of people out there who aren't being asked to volunteer, who maybe need to learn how to volunteer, but how do we exploit them? You know, how do we find those people? Where do we look? Not necessarily where the other people are, but where are the opportunities? There may be the same 20 donors giving to almost every organization, but there's a lot more wealth in our communities than what exists in those 20 donors. So how do we talk to other donors and find out what they're looking for and what they want to invest in? So when there's that gap, that pile of shit, if you will, between you and the big dogs, that's where we have opportunities. So I think that's one of the biggest opportunities to do, is to go out there and exploit opportunities across the board. And
that's where I think the individual organizations that don't have an abundance mindset get stuck, because they cannot think creatively on how to grow that donor list past that first 20 people that everybody else have, because they're stuck with it. Well, they've got those 20 people, we don't, therefore we're going to be terrible and we can't raise more money. And without knowing that, there are countless, there's tens of thousands of people in their community. How many of them sit or sleep on a sack of money at night that don't tell anybody about it, right? And you wouldn't know that because you're so bogged down with the, well, oh, woe is me. I don't have a story to tell, or I don't have something to do here. And oh man, they're just going to beat us again. And on a national giving day again, and we're going to feel bad about it, and we're not going to be on the top 10, and this old shucks kind of attitude, and which is ridiculous, knowing that your donors don't care about that. Your donors care about giving to your cause, and they want to feel good about what they're doing to you. And if you don't have that competitive edge, and if you don't differentiate yourself between those two, they don't care. They don't care.
Well, and one of the things that when I met Patrick, one of the things that I really wanted to push home was, everybody else is doing something, that's probably not the same thing you want to repeat. And far too often, I think that, we look at, so who are these successful agencies out there? Now, we can learn from them. That doesn't mean you necessarily want to do things exactly the same, because if you look just like everybody else, what do you exist for? And far too often, and go ahead.
No, special events is the same thing too. Right? Everybody who is in the town in which you live in does the same thing. They do a golf tournament. They do a gala. They do a walk. Everybody does the same thing. And so I can't compete with a national organization that gets 100,000 people to a walk in the Twin Cities. They're within driving distance. Why would I be able to be an effective fundraiser and do an event that's the same thing over and over again? And that uniqueness and that creativity is only spawned through the idea that we can be competitive with somebody else because we're doing something completely different.
Absolutely. And I think that we have to be unapologetic in that. And that is why I think that opportunities like this, and especially as we become regionally, is that there are smaller fundraisers that are happening in other communities that you can maybe learn from. And you got to think outside of the box, though. And maybe if you're going to do an event, again, as Patrick just said, the gala thing is just, at least here in Minot, is overdone. Mm-hmm. We cannot have a speaker come in, a band play music, silent auction on the side, and have people, write big checks. That's saturated right now. You have to do something else, because there's enough of those out there. And so you just try to find what is your niche and what is your opportunity. So,
Scott, so part of the series and doing them in kind of 30-minute chunks is coming up with a step or a solution or something that individuals watching this now or individuals who are watching this later can do to embrace their competitiveness, sort of enlighten themselves to do something today that makes their organization better, their leadership better. What's the one thing that you can give it as advice just to do something today to just kind of move the needle forward as it pertains to competition?
I would say brag. Unapologetically brag about what you do. Find out something you're proud of, something you've done better, something you've done doing that somebody else isn't doing, something that you've built, and brag about it. Whether it be go put it up on Facebook and say, here's an example of what we've done, or call up some of your friends and brag about it, or send an email out to some of your donors, whatever it takes, brag. And I think that, success has an amazing ability to breed success. And so when you can get in that habit of just beginning to kind of promote yourself, and we have this, especially us in this northern, oh golly gee shucks, Norwegian type things, no matter how good things are, just wait, they'll get worse type stuff. We're afraid to do that sometimes, and there's nothing wrong with that. Let that evil, little Tasmanian devil sitting on your shoulder, push that guy aside for a while, and let your better angel out, and talk about what you do and be unapologetic about it. So that's the one thing I would say is do something today to brag about how awesome your organization is or what you're doing is, because when you do that, it just begins that process and get to that point where people begin to expect it. And it takes a lot for people that aren't just naturally negative people to get annoyed by it. And don't let those people who are naturally negative, don't give them the keys to your car. So.
And then maybe kind of talk about kind of wrapping sort of things up is sort of when approached as an organization to collaborate, which is incredibly important to do. What within collaboration can you be a little competitive about? So again, it's going back to your example of the college project where you're all working on the same team. Somebody's not going to pull their weight. What within collaboration can still keep that competitive fire going? As far as your examples that you've experienced.
So no different than the collaboration fundraiser we just talked about, was that a few of us on that group became competitive with each other, that I will get my list done. That when we sit down and we develop a to-do list, I will make sure every time absolutely that is done. I will make sure that our board of directors sells more tickets than your board of directors do. I'm going to make sure we have more volunteers there. And if everybody's doing that, even if you lose, it's going to be a much better event because you're going to have sold more tickets, have more volunteers, have more donors there. And so I think that little bit of naturalness of not in a harmful way, but just competing with each other we're going to be a bigger part of this. We're going to be that smart student in the room that everybody relies on, and we're going to challenge everybody else to do the same. And not so much in a way that we're just going to take over, but rather, hey, I'm going to get 5 donors between now and the next meeting. Can you get 5 donors too? And just pushing each other and challenging each other. So I think that's that opportunity, even in collaboration. Same with collaboration for programming. We're going to do more outreach. We're going to bring more clients in. We're going to, whatever it means. I think there's a lot of different ways that you can compete with each other in order to even within collaboration, to make that collaboration more effective. So.
I think some, especially in sort of this region, as far as either giving days or end of year donation, they see some of the big organizations sucking up all the energy and all the idea of being even able to be competitive. I think the mindset that now we have to have when we're never going to be, we'll never raise $600,000 in a day because we don't have an event and we haven't done X, Y, and Z, or we'll never be in the top 10 because we don't have this, this, and this. I really think the mindset then has to shift to a micro level of what your competitive edge has to be, rather than the global. Shove off the global stuff. Who cares? Really, who cares? If you're not part of the top 10 here, if you're not part of the top 10 somewhere else, it doesn't matter. You're not making you being a top 10 on something else in a day or an end of year campaign doesn't affect your programming or your donors or your volunteers and one iota. But what you may need to do is switch your brain to how can I be competitive against what we did last year, what we're going to do this year, really getting down to that micro level to make sure that you're challenging yourself while not comparing yourself to someone that you will never be or you never want to be. I think that's another little twist to this competitive thing is you're not going to be competitive and raise more money than breast cancer nationally. You're not going to you're not going to compete with some of these larger organizations on some of these specific days. But what you can do is compete with yourself, compete with your region, compete with your local groups around you to build yourself up. And that is okay, because it's acknowledging that you're doing something completely different and you're in a different mindset, because then that positivity and that enthusiasm and that awesomeness that you can then transform to your donors, I think is super important too.
Yep, and absolutely. And that's one of the things, and I've had a hard time selling that to my board of directors and to my fundraising team, that we have to compete against ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
There's other agencies that have been doing fundraising for 60 years in our community, and they've got massive campuses, and guess what? They're going to raise more money than we are, but we have to raise more than we did last year. We need to make this single event a little bit better than it was last year. And if we can double our fundraising in a year, which we've done, that's a step. But we're still not bringing in that $600,000 as you talked about, Patrick, but we're bringing in numbers that make our organization better. And that's what we're competing against.
It's perfect. I love this as a topic of conversation to begin this kind of web series that we're doing. I love that we're going to keep it under 30 minutes. I'd love to leave it open to one or two questions. If anybody has them up on the thing, just either raise your hand and I can unmute you, or unmute yourself. I think I've given everybody permission to do that. And if anybody has any particular questions, either for Scott or for the group as sort of giving an opinion. I don't see any hands raised. That's okay. It's okay. It's early. It's not, it's 9:27. We're fine in the early in the morning. I'm going to repost this on a number of different channels, both on Scott's personal page, my personal page, Do Good Better Consulting page, Do Gooders Network. If you're not part of that, you should. Nonprofit Thoughts. We're going to cross-post this everywhere. Let's begin the conversation too. If people have particular questions on how they want to view competition, either individually, sort of begin this this sort of bounce back of ideas in this sort of safe space that we can actually talk about stuff that's not going to overwhelm a board of directors. It's not going to put you in a position to justify it in a group of other people. And I think it should be really fun to do and keep doing in perpetuity. Look for another list of follow-up conversations and other things that we're going to be doing. A big shout out and a big awesomeness for all things presenting from our friend Scott. So give him a big old thumbs up and an appreciation note. Send some likes his way. Follow him on Facebook and go visit him at nonprofitthoughts.com. And I appreciate everybody coming today. That's a big list of going live on number one with 48 hours notice. I'm excited about it. Thanks for coming. And hey, we'll talk to you guys later.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Holmes.
You bet.